Bum 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 bum. Nicholas and Alexandra by Robert K. Masse. I think this is the first audiobook that I've reviewed, and this one was actually a pleasure to listen to, even though it was a lot of tapes to go through. And it was read by a gentleman named Frederick Davidson, whose voice is very familiar sounding to me, but I don't know exactly where I've heard him from. But very, very kind of sophisticated British accent. And this book was written in the 60s, so about 40 years after the events. Well, 40 to 100, because he goes into Russian history before Nicholas and Alexandra's time. He kind of touches on the history of the Romanov family and all that. But and the reason that I did the Tetris theme, kind of hummed the Tetris theme at the beginning, is that in a way it's very fitting. Number one, because it's indirectly Russian because of the game Tetris being Russian, and then also because this book was kind of like watching two people kind of destroy their lives, kind of one bad mistake after another. And so it was very similar to watching a game of Tetris. Listening to this book was. And it's interesting that what inspired Robert K. Masse to write this book. He actually had a son who was hemophilic. And obviously Nicholas and Alexandra's son, Alexei, was a hemophiliac. And that was a major contributing factor in the downfall of the Russian royal family. Although I would argue that it was not really the deciding factor. It was really more the mistakes that these two made. And one of the themes of this book, in my opinion, and before I forget, I actually picked up these audiobooks from a college, a local college, that was getting rid of its entire audiobook collection, at least all of its books on tape. And I ended up picking up a lot of them. And a few years ago, I actually made a video about that, and I'll probably link that video in the description, because it's actually kind of cool to have a college's former audiobook library in your home. Because we're talking, like, at the time when those were bought new, thousands of dollars worth of educational material, and here I get to pick it up for free. And all I had to do was wait about 30 years or so, 35 years, for this material to become completely technologically obsolete, so that I could pick them up for free. So anyway, that'll be an interesting thing to link in the description. But anyway, Nicholas and Alexandra were essentially the king and queen of Russia up until 1917, I think it was 1718. And Nicholas was Russian, although genetically he was actually more Central European. He was related to all of the Russian or all of the European royal families. He actually bore a striking resemblance to, I believe it was King Edward. The two of them looked almost like twins, and it made sense that they would look alike because they were almost, they were close relatives. And Alexandra was also from that same genetic bloodline. She was related to Queen Victoria, I believe a niece. Not sure about that, but a close female relative to Queen Victoria, and that's actually where the reason why she was a carrier for the gene that causes hemophilia, and that led to Alexei being born with the disease. And he gets into that. He gets into the other members of the European royal families who were hemophiliacs, and he gets into the genetics of it. It's interesting how much was already known about genetics even in the 1960s. But I'll actually show you these tapes here. 1, 2, 3, 9 of them in part 1. And then we're talking another 8 in part 2. So, pushing 20 tapes. And I actually breezed through these pretty quick, because it was just such a kind of a captivating story. But, so, anyway, one thing that I took away from this story is that there's really no such thing as an exceptional family. You know, like monarchies and autocracies are kind of based on the idea that there are certain families that are highborn, you know, certain families that are better than others, you know, smarter, better leaders, better bred, whatever. And it's just simply not true. You know, you look at just about any family, and you have the good eggs, the bad eggs. It's almost a kind of a random mix of people. And yeah, maybe there are some tendencies that carry on for one generation or two, but you know, just because your grandfather was an amazing person doesn't mean that you're going to be. And you know, Nicholas, although I have to say, Nicholas was a very sympathetic character. I actually, you know, you look at pictures of him, and he looks like a nice guy. I mean, he has that kind of just, kind of like, oh, well, I guess I'm a king. You know, the kind of just a very, very friendly, kind looking guy. And in this, it sounds like, from what Robert K. Masse, how he describes him, it sounds like that's true. For basically a despot, which he was born into that, he was actually a very decent, well-meaning guy for the most part, who was really trying to do the right thing. And he was actually kind of trying to usher Russia into a more democratic system. He instituted the Duma, which was kind of like the Russian parliament, kind of analogous to that. And you know, before he took power, the serfs were liberated in the 1800s, meaning that the public were free; they weren't slaves anymore, essentially. And the press was free in the early 1900s, and that led to that actually ended up being a problem for them, because when Rasputin made the scene, the press was free to pretty much say and imply whatever they wanted about Rasputin and Alexandra. Even though I'm convinced, Masse has convinced me that nothing really happened between Alexandra and Rasputin. Alexandra was pretty dedicated to Nicholas. She didn't believe the stories about Rasputin being a disgusting womanizer, all kinds of awful things. She didn't believe it. She just didn't believe it. Now, that may be partly because he seemed to be able to temporarily cure Alexei for periods of time. And that's another character you feel sorry for during this saga, is Alexei, because here he's just this little boy, doesn't really seem spoiled or anything, and the fact that he's so ill, you know, it kind of kept him from ever becoming spoiled, because he really understood pain and he understood suffering, and so it made him very empathetic. But yeah, Nicholas and Alexandra, what makes them interesting is that in a lot of ways they were really just kind of like a typical couple, you know, like just an average couple that you might run into today, you know, like maybe sort of well off, like maybe like an upper middle class couple or something, but they seem like a fairly typical couple that you know, were good for each other, but in some ways enabled each other at the same time. And I think that they did enable each other. Nicholas enabled Alexandra's meddling in state affairs, because Alexandra was so dedicated to Rasputin because she wanted him to be happy, so that she would keep close to him. She was she would write to Nicholas. There are so many letters. That was actually my least favorite part of the book, was having to listen to letter after letter of Alexandra basically instructing Nicholas to appoint this minister, get rid of this minister, purely because of what that minister might think of Rasputin. You know, if they don't like Rasputin, they need to be gotten rid of. And it was so petulant and so Karen-like. I mean, I have to say, Alexandra was definitely a Karen. She thought she knew a lot more than she did, and the whole time you're listening to those letters, you keep saying, Nicholas, you've got to put your foot down. You have got to get her in line, because all of this made it into the press, and it was a mistake. It was a big mistake, because it just fueled the resentment that was already there against the autocracy, you know. Another important point that I forgot to mention, but it really is important, is that Alexandra was actually German. And you have to remember, this was like leading up to and during World War One, when Russia was, you know, swaths and swaths of Russian men were getting killed in World War One. And here they have a German Tsarina, and that didn't sit well with a lot of people, and so that made it all the more important for Alexandra to really keep her mouth shut, but she didn't, and that was a big problem. That was a big mistake on her part. And I think Nicholas and Alexandra were just very average people. They were trained to be noble, and so they were better at it than the average person would be, but they were very average people also. So, you know, it's kind of, I was actually thinking about, you know, how I said that there really is no such thing as a family that stays exceptional through the generations. It made me think, you know, what are the Einsteins up to now, or the Edisons, you know? Like if well, actually, not that Edison was all that great in the first place, but we'll go with Einstein. If Einstein's great grandchildren are out there right now, you know, say he has a great granddaughter or a great granddaughter, she's probably not at a university perfecting string theory. She's probably on TikTok perfecting silly string theory. So, and that's for legal reasons. That's purely a joke. I'm sure that if Einstein has a great granddaughter, that she's an amazing, strong, independent, brilliant person. But I just said that purely for humor. But it you know, there's still a point to it. The point being that whoever he or she is, or whoever they are, whoever his descendants are, they're probably not as brilliant as he was. They're no Albert Einstein. It's just not. I'll bet you anything, unofficially, that they're not that they don't have his IQ, that they don't have his insight, they don't have his brilliance. And Nicholas and Alexandra did not have the brilliance of perhaps their ancestors. And they were also dealt a very rough hand. They were dealt a rough hand, and they played it badly. So, but it took a long time for things to really fall apart, and it was a long, kind of painful process. One thing that I appreciate is the fact that Masse doesn't let Rasputin steal the show, because Rasputin does tend to steal the show in this account, in the account of what happened to the Romanovs. He talks about Rasputin really about just as much as he has to, but he doesn't even talk about the details of how he died, which have been the subject of a lot of coverage. He just kind of lets you know who he is, why he's important, and then he kind of moves on to Nicholas and Alexandra, because this is their story. One sad moment, one moment I thought was sad, was when they're on a train and they're basically fleeing, and that's another sad thing is like their family, the other royal families of Europe, it kind of left them twisting in the wind. Like Nicholas wanted to flee to England, and that ended up not working out. A lot of royal family members who are deposed, I think they tend to defect to France, but Nicholas actually wanted to go to England. He spoke perfect English, no accent, nothing. I mean, he basically was British, essentially, and I think that if they could have made it to England, it would have been great. But another reason that things went badly for them is because they didn't want to separate. At first, Nicholas was going to abdicate and give the czarship to Alexei, his son, but that would have necessitated Alexei being apart from the rest of the family, and they didn't want that. Which is so that's kind of tragic. That one of the reasons that they were in such a vulnerable position was because they didn't want to separate as a family. And then he ended up, I believe, then instead of giving the czarship to Alexei, giving it to his brother, who had it for a very short time, and his brother was the last czar before the Bolsheviks overthrew everything. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying, what was sad is they were on a train and they actually passed by Rasputin's village, and they actually were able to see his house, the house he grew up in, from the train, and they all gathered to look at it like it was this, like, wow, it's the man who basically doomed them, and they're acting like driving by his house is such a momentous treat, But so anyway, I think that covers just about everything I have to say about it. It's quite a saga. It's a major event in world history because, I mean, Russia is like 1/6 of the planet, and a lot of world history comes out of that area, and it's an interesting place too because it's kind of European but kind of not. It's really its own thing, and it's so many events of the early 20th century, World War I and the Bolshevik Revolution and all of that kind of coming to a hinge in the early 1900s like that. And it's just a very interesting story. And if you want to research this story or learn more about it, I think you can't really do better than this book. I think that it's, even though it's 60 years old at this point, it's still one of the most comprehensive accounts. You can tell that Masse really did his research. Nothing that he speculates or talks about is not backed up by some kind of written account, and there's a lot of written documentation of this event. So he does talk a little bit about the whole Anastasia thing. Not too much though, because this is really more about the leading up to the event of their deaths and not actually their deaths themselves. I actually watched an interesting documentary that claims that one of Anastasia's sisters might have actually been the one who survived. Wasn't quite proven, but they looked at photos of her versus this woman who ended up living in South Africa, and they said that structurally their faces are almost identical, and this woman claimed to be of the Russian royal family, although she never actually said who she was. She never said she was Anastasia, so that also lines up with the possibility that she might be one of the sisters. But anyway, that's kind of a separate thing. So yeah, I really enjoyed these. I'm going to hold on to them. I'm really glad that the tapes were all in good shape. I may go ahead and listen to it again, although I may not, because it's pretty grim subject matter, but I'm just glad to have them in my possession, and I'll display them in the audiobook section in my in my office area. So thanks for watching. Make sure to comment. Let me know what you think of this review and what you might have to say about this topic. And make sure to subscribe to Captain Unusual for more book reviews and then a lot of other stuff too. Mostly kind of historical, amateur history, and hobbyist type videos. Check out my channel and see what you think. Thanks for watching.